They watched me vomit over the railing, their laughter echoing across the deck like daggers. The ringleader even slapped my back, calling me pathetic. But when the Admiral's helicopter landed and he saluted me first, their faces drained of color. They had no idea who I really was. If you love stories about karma and sweet revenge, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story will leave you speechless. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped between bills and junk mail like it didn't belong in my ordinary life. Heavy cardstock, embossed gold lettering, the kind of thing that whispers exclusivity before you even open it. A luxury naval charity cruise, black tie, military elites and decorated officers, wounded veteran fundraiser. My hands trembled as I read it, and not from excitement. The sea and I hadn't been on speaking terms for 3 years, not since the accident that left my body broken and my soul fractured in ways no doctor could diagnose. I stood in my kitchen for 20 minutes, just staring at that invitation, feeling the pull of two opposing forces. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to protect myself from the memories that salt water always dragged up from the depths. But there was another part, quieter but more insistent, that whispered about duty and honor and the crew I'd lost. This fundraiser was for them, for people like them, for the families left behind when the ocean takes more than it should. I owed them this much. I owed them everything. So I said yes, even though my stomach was already churning at the thought. The marina was exactly what I expected. Polished teak, gleaming brass, and people who looked like they'd never known a day of real struggle in their lives. I arrived in a simple navy blazer and slacks, no medals pinned to my chest, no rank visible, just me trying to blend into the background like I'd become so good at doing. Champagne flutes caught the sunlight as guests laughed and posed for photos against the backdrop of the yacht. It was beautiful in that untouchable way, the kind of beauty that made me feel like an intruder. That's when I first saw them. Sloane was impossible to miss, dripping in diamonds that probably cost more than my annual salary, her laugh practiced and projection perfect like she was always performing for an invisible audience. Her husband Reese stood beside her, chest puffed out in that way some men have when they think their college glory days still matter. And Tessa, Sloane's shadow, hovering nearby with eager eyes, ready to laugh at whatever joke came next. I was reaching for a glass of water when Sloane turned and thrust her champagne flute toward me without even looking at my face. "Be a dear," she said, her tone sugary and dismissive all at once. For a second, I just stood there, processing the assumption that I was staff, that I was there to serve rather than attend. I gently corrected her, kept my voice steady and polite. She blinked, then laughed like it was the funniest misunderstanding in the world, though her eyes never quite reached the warmth her mouth tried to convey. The ship's horn sounded, deep and resonant, and we began to move. I felt it immediately, that subtle shift beneath my feet, the way the world tilts when you're no longer on solid ground. The weather forecast had promised light chop, nothing serious, but my body didn't care about forecasts. It remembered every violent wave from 3 years ago, every moment of that explosion, every second I spent in the water wondering if I'd see morning. My old injuries woke up like ghosts, and the nausea began its familiar, inevitable climb. I excused myself quietly and headed for the railing, praying no one would notice. I was wrong. The first wave of nausea hit me like a punch to the gut, and I barely made it to the railing before my body rebelled completely. I gripped the cold metal with both hands, my knuckles white, my vision blurring at the edges as everything I'd tried to keep down came up. The sound of the party behind me faded into a distant hum, replaced by the roar of blood in my ears and the relentless churning in my stomach. I felt weak, exposed, like every defense I'd carefully built over 3 years was crumbling with each heave over the side. Then I heard it, that laugh, high-pitched, deliberate, cutting through the sound of the waves like a knife through silk. Oh my God, is she seriously seasick? On a yacht? Sloane's voice carried across the deck with the kind of projection that could only be intentional. She wanted an audience, and she was about to get one. I heard footsteps, multiple pairs, converging on my location like sharks drawn to blood in the water. I couldn't turn around, couldn't defend myself, could barely hold myself upright as my body continued its betrayal. Reese's booming laugh joined his wife's, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. I was a spectacle. "Holy hell, who even brings someone this fragile to a naval event?" he announced to whoever was listening, and from the responding chuckles, plenty of people were. I felt phones being raised, heard the subtle clicks of cameras, imagined the captions already being typed. My humiliation was becoming content, something to be shared and mocked across social media feeds. "Maybe she lied about her military connection," Tessa chimed in, her voice eager to please, desperate to be part of the cruelty. "I mean, look at her." I wanted to speak, to tell them they didn't understand, that this weakness wasn't who I was but what had been done to me. But my throat was raw, my head spinning, and the words wouldn't come. I was trapped in my own body, a prisoner to pain they couldn't see and wouldn't believe if they could. That's when I felt it. The sharp, sudden impact of Sloane's hand on my back, disguised as playfulness but hard enough to nearly knock me off balance. "Maybe stick to swimming pools next time, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with false concern that barely masked her contempt. The small crowd around us erupted in laughter, and I heard other voices joining in, people I'd never even met deciding in that moment that I was worth less than them. "Didn't know they allowed landlubbers here," someone said. Another voice, older and more pompous, added, "She probably bought her ticket at a discount." Each comment landed like a physical blow, and I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller under the weight of their judgment. I finally managed to pull myself away from the railing, stumbling toward a quiet corner of the deck where I could try to recover some semblance of dignity. But Sloane wasn't done with me yet. She followed, her entourage in tow, emboldened by the laughter and the lack of anyone willing to stand up for a stranger who was clearly weak, clearly out of place, clearly not one of them. "Let me guess," she said, standing over me as I leaned against the wall, trying to breathe through the waves of dizziness. "You're someone's pity invite, right? Did you buy your ticket at a charity auction or something?" Reese stepped closer, his cologne overpowering, his smile cruel. "What branch were you even in? The Coast Guard gift shop?" The laughter that followed felt like drowning. I stayed in that corner, invisible and forgotten, while the party continued around me like I'd never existed at all. An older couple had tried to help me to a seat earlier, genuine concern in their eyes, but Sloane had intercepted them with a wave of her manicured hand. "Don't enable her," she'd said, loud enough for me to hear. "She clearly can't handle herself." Even kindness was weaponized against me, twisted into something that made me feel more pathetic than the mockery itself. I stared out at the horizon, watching the line where sky met sea, and wondered why I'd come at all. The faces of my crew flashed through my mind, the ones who didn't make it home, the ones this charity was supposed to honor. They deserved better than this. They deserved better than me hiding in corners, too weak to even defend their memory. But my body wouldn't cooperate, and my voice felt stolen, and all I could do was breathe and wait for the moment I could escape. Then everything changed. The announcement crackled over the ship's intercom, cutting through conversations and clinking glasses like a thunderbolt. Admiral Weston was arriving. The Admiral Weston. 3-star, legendary, the kind of name that made career officers stand straighter and civilians go quiet with respect. A helicopter arrival. The event's main attraction, the reason half these people had probably bought tickets in the first place. The energy on the deck shifted instantly. Sloane's voice reached a fever pitch of excitement as she grabbed Reese's arm, practically dragging him toward the upper deck for the best view. Tessa followed like a loyal puppy, and the crowd surged upward, everyone wanting to be close to greatness, to brush against power and prestige, to say they were there when the Admiral arrived. I stayed where I was, still recovering, still invisible. I could hear the helicopter before I could see it, the distinctive whump, whump, whump of rotors cutting through the air, growing louder until it drowned out every other sound. The wind picked up, whipping hair and napkins and tablecloths into chaos as the aircraft descended onto the helipad. I watched from below as it touched down, as the door opened, as a figure in a decorated uniform emerged with the kind of presence that doesn't need announcement. Admiral Weston. Even from a distance, he commanded attention without asking for it. His aides flanked him as he stepped onto the deck, and the crowd parted automatically, instinctively, creating a path like he was royalty. I could see Sloane positioning herself strategically, her practiced smile ready, her phone discreetly angled for the perfect candid shot. But the Admiral wasn't looking at her. His eyes were scanning the crowd with purpose, like he was searching for something specific, someone specific. And then, impossibly, his gaze locked onto mine. My breath caught. 3 years had passed since I'd seen him, since that day in the hospital when he'd pinned a medal to my pillow because I couldn't sit up to receive it properly. But I'd know that face anywhere, those eyes that had seen too much and carried too many burdens. He started walking, not toward the eager crowd pressing forward with extended hands and rehearsed greetings. Toward me, directly toward me, cutting through the mass of people like they were water and he was a ship with a destination. The murmurs started immediately, confusion rippling outward. Who is she? Why is he going to her? I thought she was nobody. Admiral Weston stopped directly in front of me, and in one fluid motion brought his hand up in a crisp, perfect military salute. "Lieutenant Commander Bryn Hale," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent deck. "It's an honor." My body moved on instinct, muscle memory overriding the weakness and nausea as I straightened my spine and returned the salute. My hand was steady despite everything, despite the trembling that had consumed me moments before, despite the eyes of every single person on that deck now burning into my skin. The Admiral held my gaze with something that looked like pride, like respect. Like he saw past the vomit-stained weakness they'd all mocked and recognized the person I'd fought so hard to remain. He turned to address the crowd, his voice commanding in that effortless way that comes from decades of leading people through impossible situations. "For those who don't know," he began, and I watched Sloane's face drain of color in real time. "Lieutenant Commander Hale is one of the most decorated officers I've had the privilege of serving alongside." The silence was absolute. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. 3 years ago, she led a rescue operation in hostile waters that saved 17 lives. He continued, each word landing like a hammer blow. Her unit was ambushed during extraction. An explosion tore through their vessel, and she sustained critical injuries that should have killed her. Traumatic brain injury, shattered vertebrae, nerve damage that the doctors said she'd never recover from. He paused, letting that sink in. But Lieutenant Commander Hale doesn't know how to quit. I could feel the shift happening around me, the air itself changing as realization crashed down on the crowd like a wave. Phones that had been raised to mock me were lowered slowly, shamefully. Tessa's face had gone pale, her fingers frantically moving across her screen as she deleted the photo she'd taken, the one she'd threatened to make viral. She was the youngest female officer to lead a special operations unit, the Admiral said. She holds the Navy Cross and the Purple Heart, and the reason she suffers from vertigo and seasickness isn't weakness. His eyes swept across the crowd, making sure everyone understood. It's the price she paid for bringing our people home. The Admiral's words hung in the air like an indictment, and I watched as shame rippled through the faces surrounding me. These people who judged me so quickly, so cruelly, were now confronted with the weight of their own ignorance. They hadn't mocked a stranger, they'd mocked a hero, and there was no taking that back. Sloane moved first, her heels clicking against the deck as she approached with tears already streaming down her carefully made-up face. They looked genuine, but I knew performance when I saw it. I'd seen it earlier when she'd handed me her champagne glass, when she'd slapped my back and called me sweetheart. "I had no idea," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. If I'd known—" "You didn't need to know my rank to treat me with respect," I said quietly, my voice steady now, grounded by the Admiral's presence beside me. "Basic human decency shouldn't require a resume." Reese stepped forward, His earlier bravado completely evaporated, replaced by stammering desperation. "We were just joking around, you know how it is. We didn't mean—" "Joking requires a punchline," I interrupted, my eyes meeting his without flinching. "Not a punching bag. There's a difference, and you knew exactly what you were doing." He had nothing to say to that. None of them did. The Admiral extended his arm toward me, a gesture of solidarity and support. "Let's get you somewhere more comfortable, Commander," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear the title, to understand exactly who I was and what I'd sacrificed. As we walked away, I didn't look back at their faces. I didn't need to. The lesson had already been taught. The Admiral led me to a quieter part of the ship, away from the stares and whispers, away from the people who were now trying to rewrite their behavior in their own minds, convincing themselves they hadn't been that cruel, that they'd just misunderstood the situation. We stood by a window overlooking the lower deck, and for the first time all day, I felt like I could actually breathe. "How are you really doing, Bryn?" he asked, dropping the formality now that we were alone. His voice carried genuine concern, the kind you can't fake, the kind that comes from having seen someone at their absolute lowest and wondering if they'll ever find their way back. I thought about lying, about saying I was fine, that I was handling everything perfectly. But this was Admiral Weston, the man who'd sat beside my hospital bed when I couldn't remember my own name, who'd fought the bureaucracy to make sure I got the best care possible. He deserved the truth. "Some days are harder than others," I admitted, my voice quiet. "The vertigo comes and goes. The sea still terrifies me in ways I can't fully explain. But I'm still here. I'm still fighting." He nodded, understanding passing between us without need for more words. Then he told me something I hadn't known, something that made my chest tighten with emotion. He'd specifically requested my attendance because this charity, this entire event, was benefiting the families of the unit I'd saved, my crew, the 17 people who'd made it home because I'd refused to leave anyone behind. "They're here," he said softly. "Below deck. They wanted to see you, to thank you properly." The tears came then, not from humiliation or pain, but from something deeper, something that felt like purpose rediscovered. For 3 years, I'd been drowning in my own trauma, questioning whether the cost had been worth it, whether saving those lives had been worth losing pieces of myself I'd never get back. And now, here they were, proof that it had mattered, that my sacrifice meant something beyond the medals and the citations. The Admiral walked me down to the lower deck, and the moment I stepped through the door, I was surrounded. Tight hugs, trembling hands holding mine, voices thick with gratitude telling me stories about birthdays celebrated and weddings attended and children born because their parents had come home. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, wrapped her arms around my waist and whispered, "Thank you for bringing my daddy back." I crumbled. In the best possible way, I absolutely crumbled. From the doorway, I could see Sloane and her group watching from a distance, finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd done. They hadn't just mocked someone having a bad day. They'd tried to humiliate someone who'd given everything for people they'd never met, who'd sacrificed her own comfort and safety so that families could stay whole. Later that evening, during the formal dinner, the Admiral invited me to say a few words. My hands shook as I took the microphone, but my voice held steady as I spoke about resilience, about the difference between visible and invisible scars, about how strength isn't measured by who never falls, but by who gets back up when everyone expects them to stay down. "To anyone who's ever been underestimated," I said, looking out at the crowd, seeing faces I recognized and faces I didn't, "your worth isn't determined by others' ignorance. It's determined by what you do when no one's watching, when there's no audience to applaud, when the only person who knows your truth is you." The standing ovation washed over me like a wave, but this time I wasn't drowning. This time I was floating. Sloane and Reese left before dessert was even served, unable to face the room full of people who now knew exactly what they'd done. Tessa disappeared into the crowd, her earlier confidence completely shattered. I didn't watch them go. They weren't worth my attention anymore. As the ship made its way back to the marina, I found myself standing at the railing again, the same spot where my humiliation had begun, but this time the nausea was gone. This time, I wasn't alone. The Admiral stood beside me, and behind us, the families I'd saved mingled with the other guests, their laughter genuine and warm. "I have a proposition for you," the Admiral said, his eyes on the horizon. "We're building a new training program for the next generation of officers. We need someone who understands what real leadership looks like, someone who's been tested and came through the fire. We need you." I turned to look at him, surprise and hope warring in my chest. "You want me to teach?" "I want you to inspire," he corrected, "the way you inspired your unit, the way you inspired me, the way you'll inspire everyone who hears your story." I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds before I nodded. "I'm in." The ship's horn sounded as we pulled into the marina, and I stood there feeling something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Not just peace, but purpose. Not just survival, but meaning. They'd thought my seasickness made me weak, that my struggle made me less than. But they were wrong. The sea that day hadn't broken me. It had forged me into something unbreakable. And the best part? I hadn't needed to prove anything. My life's work, my sacrifice, my crew, they spoke for themselves. The medals didn't make me strong. The rank didn't make me worthy. I'd always been those things. Some people just needed a 3-star admiral to point it out before they could see what had been there all along. Sometimes the people who judge you the loudest are the ones who understand you the least. But real strength doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need validation. It just needs you to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep standing even when your body betrays you, and the world mocks you and everything in you screams to give up. If this story moved you, hit that like button and drop a comment about a time you proved someone wrong. Subscribe for more powerful stories about resilience, karma, and the strength it takes to keep going when everyone expects you to quit. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's fighting their own invisible battles. And remember, never mistake someone's struggle for weakness. You might just be looking at a warrior in disguise, someone who's survived storms you couldn't even imagine, someone who's earned every scar, every trembling hand, every moment of doubt, someone who's stronger than you'll ever know. Because at the end of the day, the ocean taught me something those people on that yacht will never understand. It's not about never falling. It's about learning to float even when the waves are trying to pull you under. It's about saving others even when you're drowning yourself. It's about standing up one more time than you've been knocked down. They laughed at my seasickness, but I survived the sea, and that made all the difference.